welcome everybody. First, we want to acknowledge our sponsor, Stephen Pikus Design, very interesting entity doing interesting work, as you're going to see now in the video that we're going to play, a word from our sponsor.
We love to make treasure from trash. I started to go to the scrapyards, the rubbish dumps, looking for items to upcycle. I think out of that came the love for making something out of nothing. My name is Stephen Pikus. I'm a lighting designer from Johannesburg, South Africa. Maybe it was even just a picture of my life personally, where maybe I wasn't going anywhere and suddenly it was a mess and chaotic, and you could make something beautiful out of that chaos. And maybe that's what drew me to it. It's a beautiful story for us. We love what we do, and we love more than just the product, but we love the story behind the product. This whole thing has evolved. It's not just my life that's changed, but it's many people's lives. There's so much out there. So if I were to cap it all, I would say the materials pick us. We didn't choose them.
So we'll see if we can give you more info as well later on when we get to other parts of the presentations. And that was just a way of also acknowledging the work that the sponsor does and in their support for this here webinar that you're going to have. Now, this is just to give an update for those folks who've familiar with us, and maybe in the past you've known us as the Living Future Collaborative South Africa. And the name has changed, but the mission and course hasn't. It's the Regenerative Collaborative South Africa. And as a legal entity now, we can formalize also the relationship with the International Living Future Institute. And in the work that we're doing, it's still the same work, and you'll see other opportunities that we're going to have. In the most part, yes, we're giving out the message from the International Living Future Institute, but in the course of time, there's more other work and activity that we're going to do in promoting this thinking around regenerative design. So please connect with us on LinkedIn as well as on Facebook. You'll find us there, and that's our email address. And we'd be very happy if we're able to collaborate on some work or even in getting the word out there. These are some of the events that have taken place in case you are here with us for the first time, and the link will also be posted there at the back. Just a sneak preview on these esteemed presenters and speakers that we're going to be listening to. We're looking forward to a presentation from John, where he's going to look at the regenerative collaborative approach, looking at it on a community scale when it comes to urban sustainability. And then Amira is also going to be talking about now a living building journey, a story where participatory design was used in a project. And then Balmoi has also got a very interesting presentation where we're going to get to see a relationship with creative industries and how this relates to regenerative design. So going beyond buildings themselves. And then Andrew is going to touch on a Lo-Fab process. So it will be interesting to hear from him on what this involves in Lo-Fab. Has it been effective, and there's measurable impact of these projects. So now let's give our attention to John. And so John, it's over to you, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Fulani, for the introduction. My name is John Kabuye. I am a green building consultant, a lead green associate, Eco District accredited professional, and I'm also an EDGE expert, and I'm also what is it called Envision sustainability professional, which is basically an accreditation for sustainable infrastructure. So I'm currently the founder and chief technical consultant for Basic Group, which is a professional services company involved in sustainability. And prior to that, I was the chief executive officer of the Kenya Green Building Society, which is basically a sister Green Building Council to the South African Green Building Council. So that's briefly about my introduction. So now my presentation this afternoon is about how do you regenerate urban communities, especially the existing communities where you and I basically live, and how do you go about that? So the presentation today is about one particular community here in Kenya, that's in Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, who have been successfully been able to apply that urban sustainability and regeneration, and of course, and how they go about it and how they can be able to inspire other communities also to follow suit, that it's possible to actually get urban sustainability and regeneration. I'd like to give our thanks and courtesy to Minera Estate Residential Association for the images which you are about to see for this particular presentation. To start it off, I just want to give sort of like a snapshot on land use in Africa, and especially East Africa, where I come from. And just to give you sort of like how we used to live prior to where we are and where we are going. So that's what I call Eco District 1.0, where we're talking about how the African communities used to be set up. And as you can see there, we used to have those houses which used to be built of straw roofs, and then we had the communal kraals, and then we had agriculture and pastoral activities as our economic activities of the time. And then, of course, there were metalworks and stone cutting. But then the interesting part of this is that these communities were built around tribal segregation. So which means if you're coming from a particular tribe, you weren't allowed to be part of that particular community, so you were excluded. And that was sort of like the early form of exclusion and denial of participation in most of the economic activities. And then we move on to Eco District 2.0, and that's the colonial era. And that is the colonial era, which was, of course, driven and inspired by the Industrial Revolution, where we now started to see railway communities coming up. For instance, like Nairobi is a perfect example of a railway city because it came up as a result of the railway community. And then you have tiles and roofs as the mode of the building materials, moving away from the thatched houses and the mud houses that used to be there prior to that. Then the interesting part that you see when it comes to the colonial era communities is that there was now this segregation, or the alienation was around a race, where you have the Africans in one particular area, you have the Indian community in another area, you have the Arabs in another area, and then you have the white settlers also in another area. So that's the segregation or the planning that used to be there at that time. And then after that, we have now what we call the post-independence. And that's where you and I currently live, that's post-independence. And there you can get all those sorts of economic activities, but the segregation that comes up now, which is creating these inequities in the communities that we live in, is around economic segregation. So we've moved away from the other forms of segregation, and now we are in economic segregation, where you have the haves and have-nots. So where do we want to go? And where we want to go is the Eco District 4.0, where we have smart cities, green cities, or resilient cities, which embrace green building, they embrace digital connections, they embrace proper health, where possible, and of course, inclusivity when it comes to communities. So basically, that's the journey that we are taking. It may not be too accurate based on the geographical location, but from where we are in Nairobi, basically that's what we are looking at, and that's the transition that we've seen over the centuries that we experienced and our grandfathers have also been able to experience. So when it comes to community living, I just brought about the term eco district and exactly what is an eco district. So basically an eco district is a rigorous, sustainable urban development framework for achieving people-centered, economically vibrant neighborhoods and of course urban scale sustainability and resilience. So this is a framework through which I just wanted a snapshot of exactly what this community is doing. And through that, I will speak through priority areas, and that's place, prosperity, health and well-being, connectivity, living infrastructure, and resource regeneration. Now, resource regeneration and living infrastructure, those are the two priority areas that really speak heavily around regeneration, but they don't exist in isolation. They have to make sense, and that's where place also comes in, and through my presentation, you'll be able to make sense of that and what this community is actually doing. So the community that I'm talking about is called the Nyayo Estate, the Nyayo Embakasi Estate, which is basically an estate built on approximately 230 acres, which was built in about 3 phases between 1999 and 2009. So it's a community that has about 5,000 residential housing units and commercial businesses, and it's home to about 30,000 people. And some of you might even call them sort of like 30,000 different emotions, but all having the same goal of living in livable, healthy communities. So for Nyayo Estate to be able to take the regeneration journey or transition in that particular area, one of the things that they needed was a backbone organization. And a backbone organization basically is an organization dedicated to coordinate and manage the neighborhood's sustainability activities. And this particular case, they have the NERA organization, the Nyayo Embakasi Residents Association, which is basically an association which was formed by the residents, for the residents to look into the welfare issues of the residents, and of course to make sure that the estate lives properly, to live in decent accommodation. And when you look at the composition or the structure of this association, you will notice that it has what we call the executive structure, and then below that you have the technical committees which support the executive committee. And this is all the creation of the residents, because it helps them to be able to embrace or incorporate the local capability which is within the estate. And that's the people who live there who have these technical expertise, so they're able to serve in these committees and they're able to steer and drive most of these sustainability initiatives. So that's how the backbone organization for this particular estate is structured, which might be different to another estate, but maybe every estate knows better how they use their estate. But this is what they found to be very useful, and apparently also happened to serve as the chairman of the environment committee for this particular estate. So when we look at the various priorities which I spoke about and what this estate is currently doing to see that they become more of a regenerative community, we talk about place as a first one. And in place, we look at engagement and of course, public spaces. So now, prior to the pandemic, people who live in this estate were struggling to really move around and go and get these green spaces, because within the estate, there was no green space, but there was a huge 4.5 acres of land which had actually been abandoned. And when you look at the pictures above, you can see the abandoned, you can see the very invasive vegetation up there. So the residents took it upon themselves and said that we need a green space within our community. And what they did is we all came together and We put a plan, we came up with a budget, and what happened is that we were able to clear that land in preparation for it to be designed into a proper green space with proper vegetation, well planned, and very sustainable. So that's basically what the estate community did to actually do so. In the meantime, there is a plan in place which is being implemented slowly by slowly, but at least after it's implemented, you'll see that this estate now will have this green space which was previously not there. And then when it comes to this sense of place which involves engagement and inclusion, what the estate has is that they have this digital connectivity on WhatsApp and Telegram and Facebook. So there, the community, they are able to share their pain points, they're able to listen to their leaders and share their points of view. And that way, the engagement and inclusion aspect of place is actually addressed through that. And then when it comes to prosperity, which basically speaks about economic development within the estate, one classic example is this digital platform which the mothers or the ladies of the estate came up with and saying that there are some economic opportunities that we can be able to tap into, but without a proper sort of like marketplace, it's very difficult. So together they came up with a very innovative idea through a Facebook group, and which is currently running to address these opportunities. And now it's culminated into a magazine which is spread throughout the entire estate. So mothers or the ladies within the estate are able to showcase their businesses, they're able to trade, and people now know what's available. And that way, economic thriving through the estate now has started to take off, and it's actually one of very good ideas that's supporting and helping the women in the estate, especially during the pandemic, where it became actually one of the sources of getting whatever you need, this nyayo mam soko. So basically soko, that's a Kiswahili word, and soko means market in English. So when it comes to health and well-being, what happened is that the estate was, well, properly designed good street networks, but of course it ran the risk of having this excellent infrastructure being abused and losing it, and probably to restore it would be very expensive. So what happens is that the infrastructure is properly kept so that we encourage active walking and jogging. And normally when you look at around from 6 to 7 o'clock, you find that a lot of actually people are able to jog. And the other thing that was put in place was excellent security. So even as late as 1 a.m., you can actually comfortably jog within the estate, and you can be guaranteed that no person can actually mug you or do anything to you. The estate is actually that highly secure because the estate came up with a security committee, and the security committee really is so much on top of things that it protects people so that we can be able to enjoy this active walking and jogging throughout the estate at whatever time somebody has and is able to do. And then I think I've spoken about the street network. It's also it's kept well, but the most important thing is to see that the street lighting throughout the night is okay. And now the estate is actually coming up with the goal of converting the existing street lighting from just the usual grid lighting to solar lighting, and that's a plan in place, which the estate is trying to do so. And when it comes to digital connectivity, the entire estate were able to strike a deal with the leading telecommunications company in Kenya for some very favorable rates, so that the estate entirely is completely connected and with some very reasonable internet rates. So regeneration now picks up in a massive way through this particular priority, and that's living infrastructure. And the estate, through the environment committee, which I currently chair, we came up with an environmental plan. And in this environmental plan, 2020 to 2025, basically we have a plan to plant as many as 4,000 trees, but currently we've planted about 1,800 trees with a survival rate of about 78%. And if you can see this particular spot in this particular picture, this was in 2018. This is how this particular space looked like, but currently this picture was actually taken early this year. This is how grown the trees are, and actually this cuts across the entire estate. So more trees are thriving and doing well. So as an estate, we've been able to partner also with other companies which want to provide seedlings, but what we've actually been able to do is we attract those seedlings and donate them to the neighboring communities so that they can also be able to grow. And people can now be able to reconnect back with nature, something which had completely disappeared within this particular estate. And then when it comes to resource regeneration, we're looking at 3 key areas, that's air, water, and waste. And when it comes to waste, the estate came up with a circular economy inspired waste management plan for the entire estate. So what you see there in those 2 houses are actually the trash houses, sort of like the waste infrastructure. But what used to happen is that people just used to throw every material in that house. They used to be dirty and bad. But then the estate say that now we need to move away from that way. We need to see that we regenerate the materials that flow within our estate. So the first thing that we had to do was to revitalize the infrastructure, make it fit for purpose so that segregation becomes possible. So what happened is that that was achieved, and you can see that these 2 different houses were sort of like the leading houses, and more trash houses are actually getting fitted out. And through that, we're actually able to recycle a lot of materials. For instance, plastic, all plastics within the estate, 100% of all plastics within the estate is actually being recycled. There is a collaboration between the estate and a company that actually recycles plastic. And also there was a collaboration with a company called Pikus and Coca-Cola, which you know all too well, which provided some of the mesh cages where it becomes very easier now to even go a little bit more granular and segregate PET from these other plastics. And that way, the materials are being recovered and regenerated. So what's happening right now, and it's part of the plan, is that the estate has come up with ways of retrofitting these particular trash houses so that more and more materials can actually be recovered. Because as you can see, that's a 4.8 by 4.8 structure, and of course vertical, that's 3 meters, so that's right around 69.12 cubic. But when you look at the current practices, before we were virtually using less volume, but now there's an opportunity to use more volume, and that's one of the best things that I've actually been able to do. In that picture in the corner below there, you can actually see some of those PET which is being taken away for recycling. So that's part of what the estate has done. When it comes to air quality, you can see that the estate was able to partner with the Kenya Green Building Society to plant air quality monitors so that we can be able to monitor the air around the estate. And that way we can be able to talk to, for instance, the National Environmental Management Authority in case there is some degraded air coming in from adjacent facilities, because closer to where we are, about 5 kilometers, there is some industrial activities which is taking place, but at times, well, they might pollute the environment. So we provide data which can be able to help even the National Management Authority to be able to do so. So back to the generation of waste material, it has actually been very successful to the point that the government took notes and they came over to the estate. They even invited people, and we taught other estates how to go about regeneration of waste materials that flow within their estate. We told them as much as estates might look different, they can be able to modulate according to how their physical estate was actually designed and planned. And through that, even the developers in Kenya have actually figured that nowadays it's now possible to come up with a specialized, dedicated waste infrastructure that can be able to recover materials, and those materials can be taken for recycling. So all that was actually learned through what was done in this particular estate. And the last one is water. So with water, the estate is also planning to come up with rainwater harvesting and wastewater recycling. It's yet to be achieved, but it's work in progress, and it will be there. And the reason for this was because of the short supply of water. And now people came to the realization that it's very good that we recycle and recover some of this wastewater, because it's a resource at the end of the day that can be recovered and used for non-potable uses. So in my last slide, which is a parting shot, this is an award which the estate received from the government. That's the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, for being the first estate to pull off a circular economy approach. And we were awarded the plaque, which says Nyayo Estate is a circular economy zone. based on those successes so that other estates can be able to be inspired. So far, about 20 estates within Kenya have actually come over to the estate to be taught how to be more regenerative within their communities. So that's my presentation for now. I want to turn it back to you, Lani. And I think when it comes to questions, whoever has a question, maybe you can set them up for the Q&A session. Thank you very much. And that's over to you, Lani.
Thank you very much, John. Very interesting. We would obviously love to hear a bit more on, how you got the community to respond to some of these initiatives that are there. But of course, we'll post all the questions in the chat box. So thank you for that presentation. Fascinating. Now we're going to listen to Amira's presentation. And this is an interesting story of a community center in Egypt where regenerative approach through biophilic design and participatory activities with the Bedouins was at the core of the design process. Amira, we're looking forward to your presentation. We know that you are a very experienced individual in this space, Living Future Ambassador, architect, sustainable and healthy building consultant. So over to you, please, Amira.
Hello, Tulani. Thank you for the introduction and for inviting me to be here with you and with everyone tonight. Hello, everyone. I'm Amira Ayoub. I'm an architect, a sustainability consultant, and an educator in Egypt. I'm a mother. I am so much passionate about sustainability and sustainable design. And I really feel that considering future generations through our daily life decisions is something that we should all take care of. And this is how I found my passion towards sustainability. And actually, I'm trying to spread the awareness through all over the MENA region, and especially Egypt, because this is where I am located. I'm currently in Dubai in a business trip, but I'm based in Egypt. And unfortunately, as you can see that in this picture, the situation in Egypt is not as we all would like to live in. So that's why we started to think about new capital, and still the regenerative approach or the sustainability approaches, different approaches are not implemented as we all wish to see it happening. But let's say that it has started anyway. We try to spread the awareness for the people to try to ask to have their building better and to try to work on that. And actually, if we looked in our history, we can see that our ancestors used to build their buildings considering the place, the people, the culture, and the climate. But this is not the case right now. So we were respecting our climate, we were respecting the integration of daylight, the integration of nature. The biophilic design was like something we used to do. We used to live in harmony with other living organisms. As you can see, we used to have to put water and food for the birds around us and for the animals. We used to live in harmony with nature, but this is not the case. And I tried to be involved with the International Living Future Institute back in 2014, and I've been a volunteer since that time. And I was really so much interested about the Institute's vision and mission and its holistic approach for envisioning a future that is socially just, culturally rich, and ecologically restorative. And I tried to work on the first registered living building in Egypt. It's Wadi Gharba project in South Sinai. It's a local protectorate, and we were helping the Bedouins, the local people there, to create a community center that serves them because they had like lack of medical facilities and they didn't have like a place to be to gather and to present their culture. So a group of young professionals and students working with non-governmental organization, and I was so happy to be part of this project that we started to work together and collaborate, and we started to learn more about the Living Building Challenge and how to make our building a net zero energy building, net zero water building. So we started to learn from the community. We started to be engaged with the community, and we started to understand that stereotypes is not always the case. As Bedouins, there was always a misconception that they are harsh and aggressive, but we realized that they are so kind and they were very welcoming. They even helped their wives and their families making bread and making lovely things. And that was a very important part, to be engaged with people, because we believe that regenerative design is an evolving process. We need to start from the people, and we need to learn from them, and we need to develop the places and create the places we are living at. And also the women there, they have an amazing role, and they work and they make these beautiful artifacts, and we started to be inspired by their work and try to integrate it in our interior design of our work. And we also started to learn about the surrounding environment and their daily habits, and they have those medicinal herbs. These herbs work like magic. I remember back then I have an allergy and I was like so much tired, and they just gave me that magical drink, and when I drank it I felt so well. And so they are so much aware of what they have, and they are so much aware of their surrounding environment and the nature around them. And the community center that we were trying to design, it has a multi-purpose rooms, it has a gallery, it has a clinic, a children playground area, a seating area for them to collaborate. This is considered also as a touristic area, so people tried, a lot of tourists go there and spend some time there. So we try to create a public space and a social space that gathers the local people and the visitors. And to do that, we started to learn from the Bedouins, and we started to create ideas with them and think together. And we started to learn about their technical, ecological knowledge. We have amazing knowledge regarding the wastewater treatment and a lot of technical, ecological knowledge that helped us to make our buildings better. And we started to learn how to build with earth using natural materials and using rammed earth. And we did it with ourselves. We tried to learn that, and we did it with ourselves. So having a regenerative perspective was like what we were trying to approach. And we conducted a lot of biophilic design workshops to understand a lot about the place. And that led us to build with nature and to build with rocks and rammed earth, and being inspired by the plants and animals. So we used the biomimicry design approach. One of the Bedouins told us that they have this kind of an adaptive larva that creates its own home from whatever local material it has, so to protect it from floods. So we started to use this biomimicry design spiral to come up with ideas for our design. So we created this adaptive unit in our building to be used in different situations as a seating unit, as a shade, and that was inspired following this approach. And it was really a very interesting process, learning process, to be inspired by nature. And this is one of the pictures of one of the buildings that is done. The project is still under construction. This is a clinic, and we are happy to say that it served so far 1,500 patients and still counting. They have a lot of volunteers for doctors that help them each day. It is actually closed for a while during COVID, but I heard that a couple of months ago it started to be operated. And to think about it, how to scale up from this scale to a bigger scale all over Egypt and all over Africa, I believe that we need to have this enabling environment. This project was like a project by volunteers, and to do that on a bigger scale, it requires government support, legal framework, institutional arrangements, skills and capacities, financial arrangements, socio-cultural acceptance. And to do that, the framework of regenerative design is the start point, to start with people and to work with people and to have this participatory approach as a start point is the thing that will help us reach this enabling environment. Well, I think project was a very inspiring experience for me, and it was like a call to action to redesign our communities from all over and to be connected more to nature and to our surroundings and to respect our culture more, because having a building that tells a story is something very unique and very special. And it is totally different than the things that we used to do, our daily conventional ways we are practicing right now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Amira. That was inspiring, very inspiring. You're adding to our knowledge and my personal knowledge as well of the Bedouins. The only thing I know is the Bedouin shepherd who threw a stone into a cave that led to the greatest archaeological discovery in the 20th century. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure there are many questions from the audience. And as you can see the comments there, it's the inspiration at the moment. So we'll post questions in the chat box if there are any, and if you don't mind handling those for us, please, Amira. Now we'd like to hand over to Balmoi. And Balmoi, we're looking forward to your presentation as well. Also along the same threads, but you helping us appreciate other things in communities and society that are as valuable in the process of creating regenerative design. So over to you, and I'll also let you own your story and introduce yourself. Thanks, Balmoi.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everybody. I just want to thank you all for this opportunity and very excited to get engaged today. I think my approach after listening to Amira and John has come at a good timing with regards to the actual people and the spaces in which we inhabit, not only from the point of view of the user, but also speaking on behalf of, let's just be very accurate from an African point of view, the flora and fauna, and even putting into perspective the gods and the dead. This is a very clear approach to regeneration. Us as Africans, I think, if I was to term and share the word with ancestral family members, I think it would be something that is quite complacent and very much a part of the commonplace in terms of African practice. So in short, Mambo Heritage is who I am sort of speaking on behalf. I am the founder of Mambo Heritage, as well as the Cultural Impact Director. And my role as founder and Cultural Impact Director of Mambo Heritage is to build a base around institutional knowledge in pursuit of valuable goals and outcomes. We want to manage the discourse that's between the market economy versus a market society. The value proposition we are building is the efficiency of hindsight as a paradigm. What does this mean? Well, the role of heritage and its data distribution as an alternative and adaptable tool for innovation to effectively capture returns of radical uncertainty through algorithmic models. I know I've just shared a little bit of our values and our vision, and just to kind of understand a little bit about who we are, our DNA. We work on a digital narrative archive type pillar in terms of services we offer. It's directly connected to our logo. We work along 3 technologies, and those would be political, financial, and engineering. This is a response to what we have encountered in I would say the last 2 years, working mostly in the informal settlements or the last mile, if you will. The 4 pillars, which are qualitative measurements, we use are resilience, solidarity, connectivity, and if we can get close to achieving a level of sustainability, that is something that we also measure in a quantum space. And I think the paradigm I mentioned earlier is really the effective efficiency, which comes in the form of virtue as we're addressing, if it's the advocacy for the people, the users, and sort of the natural environment in which we find ourselves living. And still keeping in line with that, I would like to just add that the model that we use is that of a real life context, almost a responsive living lab, as we address whole systems, living systems, and the likes. So that's mostly addressing the user, private actors, knowledge-based institutions, and the public actors. The critique today is not in any particular order, but these are sort of the topics I'm looking to cover and address, and just being very clear that these learnings and insights I'm sharing are definitely voiced from communities we have worked in. That would be, across the informal spaces in Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, Burundi, Zambia, and Central Republic of Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. And I think here on this slide, I think I could just mention a very great artist here in Nairobi called Meshach. He's very big on upcycling. I think he's one individual I see heavily, stopping trash trucks, anybody who's sort of diving, dumpster diving. Meshach is a well-known artist who takes a lot of scraps and spares from cars, car dealers, and mechanics. The other thing that's very interesting is the visual on the right with regards to, maybe the aesthetic of the built environment. It's very hard to zoom in to maybe show that, but there's actually a door on the top that is saying no parking. Very interesting feature that's upcycled and placed on the top of a, I think, 11-story building. And I thought that outside of the composition of the building does need some sort of mention around the upcycling space. A door on the 9th floor. More and more cities have launched urban strategies around the world over the past decade. As a result, this has become a very interesting and important area for policy innovation. As per our observations, in my short talk today, I look at the broader context within these strategies, how they have emerged, look at changes in national state policies towards the arts, changes in patterns of cultural consumption, local opposition in central government and local government, and economic restructuring and inter-urban competitions, which we've also partaken. A tool for urban development in recent years is that of cultural regeneration. This is seen as a means of restoring and improving the quality of life, of urban life, through the enhancement and development of unique characteristics of a place and its people. This is actually some work we've done in Uganda at Ndere Cultural Arts Center. Also getting into the space of vernacular architecture, being able to create palettes and a variety of different sort of sample walls, sample rooms that are also heavily embedded on upcycling of materials and also bringing back into effect cultural nuance around product. I think in Nairobi, we have a space called Bomas of Kenya, which has a similar layout, which is also a celebration of culture and heritage amongst Kenya's ethnic kingdoms. So this is also a very different approach to revisiting, the language of heritage and sort of the appropriation of product and material. It is also suggested that for improved chances of success, the adoption of holistic approach to urban regeneration is required, with policymakers using culture as an organizing principle for city management and urban design. This is a quote that I've engaged with folks at the African Union, and I sort of asked myself questions with regards to many of these African cultures that emphasize the importance of ancestors as intermediaries between the living and the gods and the supreme creator. And I feel that art may also be used to depict the gods and is valued for these functional purposes. So as the pandemic has provided us an opportunity to re-examine the continent's socioeconomic priorities, including the role of cultural workers towards contributing to building stronger and more resilient health within the social sectors. And I think promoting equality, inclusion, social cohesion are all the, sort of the buzzwords we see going around. But I think what we really need to start addressing are, 5 key areas, which is the arts and culture, health, wellness, and post-COVID-19 response, African languages, history, oral traditions, and the heritage. The AU, once again, and its relevance, I've spoken about the qualitative approach that we've been working on at Mambo Heritage. It starts to get into a very unique space addressing, evolutionary drivers. Evolutionary drivers, if we were to, kind of put them on an X and a Y coordinate, juxtaposed to our 4 pillars, resilience, connectivity, solidarity, and sustainability, start to create very unique engagements within these very unique communities, and more importantly, the users the users of these spaces. I think in this quote, there's an area where I would just like to highlight on this presentation towards the bottom. The continuities between African beliefs in mystical casualty and the attractions of pneumatic forms of Christian piety are therefore not too difficult to find. Well, really, we find ourselves, caught up in a very strong adoption of a belief system where Africans have, and I think people from the land that we call Africa, have predominantly found systems around knowledge, passing of oral information. And I feel that as a transition, or even more importantly, as an evolution of cultural entanglement, is very interesting. What do I mean by this cultural entanglement? As a statement, you have ancient Nubia and Kemet, where you would find products such as pots and pans, and even the layout of a triptych order that comes in a facade in architecture lends credence to ancient Nubia, which is thus adopted and adapted within the confines of Kemet. So if I was to really just be very clear on a cultural entanglement, you look at 4 areas, which is adoption, adaptation, indifference, which is also rejection, and then the mutual influence rather than the assimilation. And I find that very interesting with some of the work that I myself and Mambo Heritage, and as well as John, have started to undertake with regards to preservation in the historical built environment. And this is actually one of the buildings John and myself are working on, located in CBD, downtown Nairobi. It's an old library built in 1931. I think one thing that's very important is the actual investment in culture, which we sort of look at, we call C, which is our social, economic, environmental benefits, which are attributed to the cultural investment. From a social point of view, we look at the confidence and the change in perception of each area and person engaging within these communities. Volunteering and social capital seems to also be on the increase, community cohesion, educational skills achievements. There's also, as John had mentioned on his presentation, there's also a crime reduction that is heavily embedded within the fabric of these smaller informal spaces. From an economic point of view, it's very direct and indirect employment. It's inward type of an investment. It talks about the business location. Is it attractive? Can it also draw in a educated workforce? And then I think the property also increases in value, where visitors and residents find themselves spending more time, more importantly, enhancing the social aspect once they've balanced economics. Environmental, well, that's the reuse of redundant buildings or open spaces. This is something that we're practicing with that one project I've shared. Improved public realm, increasing use and sense of safety, and reducing vandalism is quite key, is also a key factor that we've sort of learned. A lot of us also, I think, on the call are very aware of Bill Reid. This is very interesting when, we sort of agree to the adoption of multiple frameworks that are global and international, and even from a Pan-African point of view. I think that the translation of not only just the action and the virtue of that sovereignty, I think the wording and the graphic information is so important as a means to translate, complex technical work to the communities at large. So the majestic baobab tree is iconic for the African continent, and it lies in the heart of many traditional African remedies and folklore. So the baobab tree is also known as the tree of life, and something quite unique is one baobab tree contains about 4,500 liters of water alone. The age of a baobab tree could live up to 5,000 years. And I know we have these sporadically spread across the coastal, dry regions of the continent. And I think this is very interesting because I use this more as a metaphor and even in many respects an allegory. And you can start to see the breaking up of sort of the regenerative culture here, where you sort of see the growth of this robust tree, which in many respects is actually inverted. African folklore talks heavily about this tree exposing its roots and all the beauty and sort of the restorative, regenerative approach is under the ground. But just for visual sakes, we've sort of represented this way as an iteration to Bill Reid's sustainability and designing against regenerative cultures. Now, this is sort of right in your face. We have also adopted the discussion around the metaverse in the Internet 3.0. Our invitation to be a part of this discussion as we start embarking on indigenous migration into this virtual world is very key and very important to us. So Mambo Heritage has started addressing culture as a new horizon for investment and management around our sovereignty and equity of debt and token. This distribution is equal to us equalizing or adopting the distribution of virtue effectively. So what does this mean? We look at blockchain as a tool blockchain as a legacy infrastructure. We get into gaming. We're also addressing human flight that is actually happening here in Nairobi from a very interesting point of view. This opens up areas of disruption and innovation. We're building currently with a protocol out in the US, social tokens as we start to develop our communities. We're also beginning to give ownership of economy in principle, a community that will be able to be more valuable tomorrow than it is today. So these creators of community can thus monetize their work as a non-fungible token that comes in the form of NFTs and social tokens. And this is sort of the direction that we find ourselves moving into quite heavily as we embrace the fourth industrial revolution. And then I think on my final slide, I just sort of want to address an old structure that was built in the 1940s. And it actually has a tie to my heritage. 4 generations away, it's about my great-grandfather. And this is a very interesting structure when it is actually the mimicking of a traditional hut in terms of form and scale. I think he's just, upon building this in, I think, 1943, has multiplied this by about 3.5. And the hierarchy of this structure and its relevance is very important in terms of the diction and the narrative around this cultural entanglement that we find ourselves. And I find that this very interesting as we start to talk about regenerative cultures and, also bringing in new narratives around the heritage of the genius loci, the place that has also been spoken about earlier. And I think just to close, there's a Zimbabwean quote that says, you have little power over what's not yours. You have little power over what's not yours. And I think this is a very key time for us to start embracing and re-understanding the discourse of what has been lost through moments of Africa with a K, the British or the colonial rule, depending on which part of the continent you have come from, thus coming back to Africa with a C and leading us into this digital realm of self-sovereignty and ownership. And I thank you for this opportunity to present.
Thank you very much, Balmoi. Really find the breadth and depth of the work that Mambo Heritage does, and I really mean that, of your work. And I'm sure there are more questions I have in my head that I would love to tap into your mind on, that organizing principle as well of culture. Would have loved to hear more on that from a city level point of view. But anyway, let's continue. And if I could really ask, now we're going to enjoy a presentation from Andrew. So you're going to share with us this Lo-Fab process or mechanism that is being used, that is real and is measurable. And would love to know a little bit more on your approach and why you feel it is measurable. And I'll also leave it to you to also own your story in introducing yourself. Over to you, please, Andrew.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Brose. I work for Mass Design Group. We're a not-for-profit research, design, and construction firm with projects across the world. I myself am based in Cape Town in South Africa, but I've spent a number of years working in East Africa, Rwanda, Congo, Uganda, Burundi. As a firm, we really work upstream to influence planning and government policies in order that we can have a larger impact. And today I want to speak a bit about how we are measuring the projects we work on in terms of their embodied carbon in order to have a better understanding holistically and globally how projects in this context stack up. As an organization, our work around the world, including work in exploring restorative food systems, addressing racial injustices, and pursuing measurable reductions in embodied carbon in the built environment, really pursues to create a future that not only conserves and stewards our current resources, but it's restorative. Restoration is an intention to heal our environment, but also communities for generations to come. And that this belief in changing the culture of how we build is fundamental to start with asking this question of why, and ensuring that we can answer that question throughout all the projects we work on. I want to speak a bit on a project that's shown this bottom right-hand corner, the Rwanda Institute of Conservation Agriculture, and use it as a bit of a case study for a few slides. to speak about how training of the next generation of leaders in conservation agriculture is leading to new thinking, not only for healthier nutritional agricultural products for Rwanda and for East Africa, but also how this institute is being used as a case study for future work and also for our own work holistically. Just as a quick overview, this project is on 1,500 hectares of land, 69 separate buildings made from stone, earth, and timber. All the foundations are in stone masonry. The walls are made of compressed earth block and rammed earth, and the roof is timber. But that we really find, there's opportunities, but also challenges in working this way. Through our work, we use a Lo-Fab, or local fabrication process or principles, which promote social and economic outcomes. And this is used not only as a method of sourcing majority of labor within a close proximity to the site, but also the materials themselves then are sourced locally. And this means for RECA, 96% of all materials by weight were from within the borders of Rwanda. And there's a lot of training and formalizing in earth and timber construction on this project, with over 1,700 current workers currently on site. And it's been like that for the past 2 years. So this is, every time we as designers and builders are making new projects, there's a significant economic investment which goes into the work. And it's important that we're tracking that effort and those energies as well. But really, I want to speak to the fact that Lo-Fab is not only developed to mitigate or to enhance this economic impacts, but also to mitigate environmental impacts. And that through local materials and traditional building techniques, which tend to have a reduced environmental impact, we can continue to seek a reduction in the cradle to site embodied carbon metrics or measurements. Something like concrete, I think it would fit well in a Lo-Fab method in terms of, it's a high labor intensive practice, but it's also high carbon in the way we typically use it. But if we can seek to be lean with it, if we can seek to use cement in a way to reinforce earth construction or to reduce the amount of concrete, then we see that there are opportunities then to continue using some standard materials which are necessary, especially in seismic regions along the Rift Valley. And we're continuing to do this even with partners in Kenya and now in affordable housing projects. RECA is itself, in terms of how it measures up or stacks against the business as usual, is 2/5 of the embodied carbon or cradle to site embodied carbon as a typical project. So we've gone through an extensive amount of research in terms of cataloging and categorizing the materials, their embodied carbon, their cradle to site embodied energy, and what's gone into the production of those materials. And then we've modeled that against a project which, as an example or case study of a project which could have been built in a similar context or situation, using materials which are more prevalent, such as fired brick, concrete masonry, a concrete frame, reinforced concrete frame, steel roof trusses, and a steel metal sheet roof envelope. And so we're using this as a method to show a clear outcome and measurement for the project itself. As others within the industry have continued to call for better building practices, we can then use this as a method or as methodology to compare against industry standards. And this not only means that it's reduction in terms of the embodied carbon values, but that also locally built projects are more easily maintained and repaired. And often the lead masons on our projects are employed by the users for this purpose. Infrastructure projects, as I mentioned, have large indirect impacts and direct impacts. And by realizing this, we can tailor the whole process, the design and construction process, so that we can maximize positive and mitigate negative impacts. We've seen harmful examples of construction to communities' environments holistically. I think as architects and designers, we've been part of that conversation for a long time. We know that about half of all global greenhouse emissions are coming from the building industry, and we need to be responsible for this in responding to how we can continue to measure and reduce our global impact. And actually measuring these impacts also gives us data to demonstrate that our approach holistically is positive. There are more systemic impacts that can be recorded in addition. And in our search to make products like doors and windows and furniture locally, we've connected with local artisans like weavers and metal workers who now have another market to work in. And we've been able to make over 2 million earth blocks for this project, which in itself is an industry creator. But of course, with these kinds of projects, there are challenges and there are restrictions. Building regulations are incredibly stringent. When we started this project, there were no earth standards either in Rwanda or in Euro codes that we're using for the design, the structural design, the benchmarking of the project. And even the country of Rwanda had banned earth construction until a couple of years ago, even though the majority of buildings, especially outside the capital, are made from earth, specifically adobe earth block. We've actually, the team in Kigali have actually just finished writing codes and guidance for the Rwanda government so that earth construction can be formalized. And we see this as an opportunity not only to recognize traditional methods of practice are building, but also to ensure that buildings which are built have some level of safety so that they can continue to be improved upon. There's little formal knowledge on how to design and build with local non-conventional materials. And many engineers might not even know that earth and stone are valid structural materials, even though that 100 years ago, this is how we've been building for a very long time. The supply chain for non-conventional materials are also not really set up for large-scale production at the moment. And partners, again, like 14 Trees in Malawi, who are using earth blocks, are in producing these at a scale of concrete masonry units, are an exception to this, and we need to continue to encourage and advocate for our partners who are going to continue to do that. So we see that there's weaknesses in supply chain and also material uncertainty. We need to continue to partner with others, whether it's in the production of earth bricks or in forestry practices, where oftentimes timber is considered a weak structural material, that we can continue to advocate for better building practices and better regulation within those industries. I just want to end very quickly on this slide. I think we need to continue to not only think about how the projects we work on are sustainable and environmentally responsible, but that during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's been made evident that breathing is really a spatial problem. And that buildings that breathe should be our imperative strategy, and producing high performance buildings that protect and promote the health and well-being of all occupants. And with using passive systems, we'll continue to advocate for both a more healthy space, but also one which is operationally more impactful. We, again, to emphasize this point, we're designers to protect and save our planet, to improve the communities in which we live, and to awaken the links that often bind us inextricably to one another. We often quote Dr. Martin Luther King in this idea of connection through what he called the inescapable network of mutuality, with the intention that everything we do has a direct connection to our neighbor and to others. And we have a massive responsibility as designers who are involved in the long-term outcomes and impacts of our global society, that we continue to remain responsible, both in the building practices and the materials we choose, and also the people who are employed on the building projects we work on. Thank you.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you very much, Andrew. I really appreciate the interesting way in which the philosophy of the organization is translated and finds expression even in the detail itself, just the architectonics. Amazing. So thank you very much for those presentations. I don't know if there are any questions.
There's a hand from Matthew, and there's a question from Ivy in the chat for Andrew.
Okay.
And the question is, how does mass source the timber in East Africa sustainably?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really tough one, and actually one of my colleagues gave a talk about this about a year and a half ago at the Timber Convention here in Cape Town. We have worked with a number of FSC certified suppliers in Tanzania and Rwanda to source Doug fir and pine tree species. The challenge we've been having predominantly is that the grading of these timber products is not consistent, and so we've had to do a lot of assessment on site to ensure that the timber is graded accurately. In some cases, We've had to actually use more timber than we expected because it was either had too many knots or was the grain direction was not correct or the cut was not correct. So it's been a massive challenge. So we've had a lot of difficulty, especially with the Rwanda Institute of Conservation, sourcing enough timber. We now, I think Rwanda is starting to look at agroforestry opportunities, especially with the opening of the school. And we're continuing to advocate for better forestry practices and forest management and looking at ways of using engineered timber products made from eucalyptus and fast-growing pine species. So it's something we're continuing to innovate on.
Cool. Is there another burning question there, Marlus, before we close?
Yes, Matthew has a very difficult question.
Matthew, please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so this is maybe a question not so much to answer now because it is very complex. I come from a background that's quite diverse. I have a history degree, studied classics, engineering, psychology, a bunch of things, but I ended up for my sins as an architect. I work in the commercial space and I see a very disturbing problem. I've been interested in sustainability since I was an architect at school. And what I've come to understand now is that, and I'm very grateful to all of you for presenting because it's been incredibly useful to think about these things. And they fed into this question, which is, I feel that there's a fundamental contradiction between the modern worldview, specifically the westernized worldview, but it's not limited to the West anymore. I call it predatory capitalism / the extractive economy, in that there's this sort of myth of progress that we can keep making things better, but the laws of thermodynamics are against us. You can't just keep taking out to build things and expect nothing to happen. But at the same time, you face the problem that when you build locally and you build sustainably, often the buildings you build do not last as long. So there's this inherent conflict in trying to build sustainable kind of systems because they require more maintenance. And historically, the reason Western capitalism became so powerful is because we managed to work out how to make disposable income. And that was largely because we managed to build and design systems that let us be free of constant maintenance of buildings and all these other economic and social structures that came with it. Now, what I'd like to know from each of these people that have presented is, how do you find the prevalent sort of non-direct democratic systems and the corporate, predatory corporate interests are subverting your attempts to do all these things? And I mean, I'm very impressed by all these things, but I suspect that it's very hard to get these things done because I feel a lot of the time the governments give with one hand and take away with the other, so to speak. They want to be given the recognition that they're doing green things, but in reality, the economy, carries on as it always has, extracting, destroying, and so on. So I don't know if anyone's brave enough to answer that question quickly or perhaps engage in further discussion. I'm certainly open to it.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. That's a good question. It does not necessarily call for bravado, but I think it would call for a layered response because it's a layered response question itself. Maybe, Balmoi, can I give it to you if at high level you're able to, if you could respond to it, and then I'll unfortunately have to close the session. Balmoi, are you comfortable with that?
Well, I'm quite comfortable with tackling a lot of questions that are heavily embedded around disruption. And I think Matthew's question is equally sort of highlighting a lot of the reasons that I, for the last 3.5 years, have pivoted into this space of regeneration. Somebody who is an interdisciplinary designer in terms of my approach, formerly trained as an architect. And, it's quite interesting also to have heard Andrew speak, having worked with mass design, I think, in 2 projects. And that's another story for another day. I think it's very key to highlight that through this regenerative process of career that I have faced, the presentation today is sort of feedback on the learnings and outcomes that have stalled, that have sort of caused this sort of roadblock effect. I think there's a young culture which we call enemy of progress. I think that comes in the form of leadership. It comes in the form of external sort of this come land as a consultant, help the needy, fly back out. I am heavily embedded in these communities that we work in. For me to even come up with the discussion of a market society and a market economy are key indicators that are reflective of our three technological problems. And that is definitely political, it's financial, in many respects, the engineering is from a regenerative process is very low tech. So I think, to dance around the question without maybe putting a dagger to it, I feel that what you've asked and alluded, Matthew, is part of the problem that would result in this lack of benchmarking, even green design. And I think this is one of the obstacles we're facing, hence why checking into crypto has become another alternative to manage the discourse of a lot of the people we work on behalf of. So, yeah.
Love this. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Matthew, that was a weighty contribution. So thank you for that. And I think, Marlus, we must make a commitment here that we will revisit this discussion for sure. There's a lot that we've got to cover. So thank you for bringing that up. And we just want to mention to you real quick that the upcoming events that we're going to have in November, there's a Race to Zero, and it's an interactive event akin to, Amazing Race, but we'll be doing it online. And there are lessons that we'll be learning on climate change. So that's just something you can sign up for and be there. It won't be a webinar necessarily like this one that we're having. And then on the 25th of November, it's the mass timber construction, and then we'll skip December. And we'll be back in January and we'll announce that. So on the 11th of November, please be around. Please do join in, read a little bit more on what this event is going to be about. And then we'd like you to sign up and have a team with you. So follow us. We'll keep on announcing some of these events that we'll be doing and the activities and the initiatives that we'll be doing. And we'll post that on social media. If keen, and this is what we're urging and encouraging everybody, is to consider this Living Future accreditation. Consider doing this and enrolling in this and being able to do some of the work, working with the Living Building Challenge and a few other elements. And you can extract some of these principles and philosophies that are found in there. Thank you to Stephen Pikus at Design for sponsoring our event. And the different speakers and the content of each presentation, the way you lifted some of the key points in your presentation, it really inspired us to think differently and look at the work that we do differently. And we're learning a lot from you. And in each one of them, there was just that third layer that you're all working in. And we really appreciate the work and you coming out to share your knowledge with us. And I do also want to acknowledge the team who worked together in putting this year event that we've just all enjoyed. So thank you everybody for attending. And we will let you know of future coming events. So thank you to everybody that's been involved. And thank you once again to the speakers and to the sponsors. Enjoy the evening.